I love everything. Fire spreading all around my room. My world's so bright, it's hard to breathe, but that's alright. Hush. Scare me till I'm numb. Oh.
What is up everyone, I am RayanS here back with another video and gaming. Everybody likes gaming, and if you're looking to build a gaming PC, you are at the right spot. So I had to build a gaming PC. There was a lot of researching required, and I had to watch every video of Linus Tech Tips, Austin Evans Tech Quickies to actually get an idea of how things are gonna get. Things really get weird around gaming PC builds. So stay tuned till the end of the video. This video is not going to be about my setup. This video is all about how to build a gaming PC from motherboard to processor and everything. So yeah, so the first tip I want to give you guys is that never buy a complete PC, a complete build, because it is probably going to cost you a fortune if you rather go for individual components. And secondly, you should know what you're building a PC for, whether it's editing, After Effects, freelancing, gaming. You should know about all that stuff before considering build a gaming PC. Third of all, you should research about the specification. What kind of specifications do you need? And if your domain is editing, what kind of specifications are required in that domain? If you are into gaming, what kind of specifications are required in that domain? Like and comment below if you want to see a video on my setup, and a sub would be wonderful. Subscribe to the channel, dude. What are you doing? Subscribe to the channel, mate. So let's talk about the things needed. The first thing you'll need is a motherboard. Motherboard is the brain of computer. Everybody says that, but I think it's the CPU. So a motherboard is generally linked to the generation of your CPU. For example, if I have a specific motherboard for Core i5 second generation, then it is only going to support second generation of all the processors from Core i3 to Core i5 to Core i7, and that also depends. And you should always, buy your motherboard according to your future upgrades. You should go for the upgraded PCI Express slots, the nvme slots. And if you buy an old motherboard, What the fuck? You look for upgrades in the future, it's going to be really hard for you guys. So I'd recommend buying a newer motherboard. It is going to cost a little, but it's worth it. Now when it comes to the second thing, it's the CPU. Now there's a lot of domains in the CPU, a lot of subcategories. There are generations. Then there are the types of CPUs, there are threads, there are cores, and as well as the phenomena of bottlenecking between GPU and CPU. So let's talk about the generations. Right now we have up to Core i9 generation, and you should consider buying a CPU which is overclockable. There are certain letters and digits for your CPU. When you go to buy a CPU, the first digit of the CPU's model stands for the generation. For example, if I have a Core i5 3470, then the 3 in the starting stands for the third generation, and the letters after that stand for the power supply, or whether it is unlocked or it is not locked, or whether it is overclockable or it is non-overclockable. That's what the letters stand for, right? And we'll move on to the phenomena of bottlenecking afterwards. Let's move on to the third thing, which is your GPU. When you hear about the GPU, it's always the graphics card, but there are a lot of things that you need to keep in mind before building a gaming PC and getting into the domain. That GPU is not always about the graphics.
Wait a minute!
GPU is not always about the graphics.
Yeah, this is big brain time. This is big brain time.
Even for a normal usage of gaming, for the esports title and etc., even a 2 gigs of GPU is really enough, more than enough. If you want to go for the AAA titles, then at least 8 gigs of GPU or 4 gigs of GPU. It totally depends on your usage, whether you are using it for editing And if you're going into the editing domain, you can even go for NVIDIA Quad RAM, because NVIDIA Quad RAM is really cheap, and you don't really need a good GPU for editing. I mean, you need a nice GPU, but not a great GPU. Now let's talk about bottlenecking. I'll describe you the phenomena of bottlenecking. Bottlenecking is actually related to the performance of your CPU and GPU. Your CPU and your GPU are interlaced together like this. If you have a weaker CPU and a stronger GPU, they're not going to be interlaced. They're going to be a strong disruption between CPU and GPU, which is going to affect the efficiency and speed of your machine. And if you have a weaker GPU and a stronger CPU, they're not going to be interlaced either. So what do you need is an optimum GPU and an optimum CPU that they could be interlaced together in order to work in coordination. And for example, if you have an Intel Pentium 4 processor, which is a very old processor and a very slow processor, and if you have a GPU AMD Radeon RX 80, 8 gigs of graphics card, this is a very powerful graphics card with a very weak CPU. They're not going to be interlaced together. There's going to be a huge performance issue between the both of them. So in order to overcome this situation, you can head over to a website called Bottleneck percentage calculator. You can put down your specs, your CPU and GPU, and it will calculate the bottleneck percentage of specific resolutions, and generally something more than 10% is considered a bottleneck. So my CPU here has a 6% of bottlenecking. Almost every CPU has bottlenecking because everything's not perfect. Let's talk about HDD or SSD. HDD is your hard drive and SSD is your solid state drive. Now HDDs are magnetic and solid state drives work on specific chips, and they are pretty faster. This is the performance of an HDD. This is the performance of an SSD, which is pretty fast. They could almost work on 15 MBs per second, which is pretty fast. So if you're going for a gaming PC, you should go for an SSD. Even for a low budget, if you're building a low budget PC, you should go for a 128 or 256 gigs of SSD, and you should boot your Windows through that SSD, which is going to give a great performance boost to your Windows. I mean, I actually installed the SSD and the Windows installed in like 2 minutes. Can you believe that? Can you believe that?
Can you believe that? Can you believe we don't have a jacuzzi?
Let's talk about RAM slots. When it comes to RAM, 8 gigs of RAM is more than enough for almost every task out there. If you're going for editing, you should go for 16 gigs or 32 gigs. Generally depends on your usage. But if you're just gaming, RAM doesn't really matter. If there's 8 gigs of RAM, it's more than enough. Let's move on to number 6. Heat sinks. Heat sinks are required to remove the heat from your machine so that it doesn't get heated up. Remember, any temperature above 69 degrees any temperature above 69 degrees is considered overheated, so it can damage your CPU or GPU. So heat sinks are very important. There are many brands out there, Coolermaster, Corsair. You can go for any type of did I say Corsair? The 7th thing is PSU, which is the power supply unit. Now the power supply unit is interlinked to the power efficiency of your CPU and your GPU. If you have a CPU that requires a very large amount of power and a weaker GPU, that doesn't matter. You can actually use any type of CPU between the power configuration of 290 watts as long as it's not a Xeon processor. If it is a core processor, then you can use it around 290 watts of power supply units. But if you are using a very strong graphics card, for example RX 580, which requires a huge amount of power supply, then you should always opt for the better power supply option. For example, you should go for 600 watts, 800 watts. There is even a 1000 watt power supply unit, which is used for mining.
Obviously.
Last but not least, we have the peripherals, the extra FPS. You know, the RGBs and stuff, the mouse, the keyboard, the monitor. You could always, that's probably your choice, that what you want to go for. Whether it's a 60 Hz monitor, 144 Hz monitor, you should go for an RGB keyboard. As you can see here, I can literally do whatever the hell I want. I just get a huge FPS increase from these RGBs, obviously. The peripherals includes the mouse and as well as the headsets right here. You can go for any type of headsets you want. Now, I know it's complex, it's boring, but it is what it is. Coming to the last point, which is the shortcut method. The shortcut method is that you should buy an OEM build. What is an OEM build? I also opted that method. OEM build is an old office computer which has a good processor, obviously, but it doesn't have a graphics card or a power supply unit. What you can do is you can buy an OEM build. You can get a good power supply unit and a good graphics card, and believe me, that is going to be a great gaming PC. If you're really into gaming right now and you want to go into the budget sector, OEM builds are best for you. These were the things that came into my mind by watching all the stuff on the internet and actually pacing out the crux from them. So if you like this video, if this video even increased 1% of your information about gaming PCs, give this video a thumbs up. A sub would be wonderful. Subscribe to the channel, guys. This is all for you. That's it, guys. If you want to see my setup, comment right down below and I'll be happy to show you. As always, peace out.